So we'll just wait a couple of minutes here if that's okay by everyone to get started. Hey, Dave is, it says Dave Ross. Is Dave Mcpherson also going to be joining us? Oh, here he comes.
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, he's just joining us now. Yeah, thanks. Good afternoon, David. So it's 1 o'clock right now. Let's go ahead and get started. We have a much smaller audience today.
You want to give it a minute?
Tuesday.
You want to give it a minute or not, all since we don't have as many?
Yeah, that's fine. Can we give it a minute here?
Just kind of let everyone know that we're.
I was going to jump right into it, Dave. Good thing you stopped me.
Well, people saw the different Zooms, so they may have tried to connect to the other one, not realizing that there are two. So smaller crowds will be less questions, so we'll have a little more time.
Well, it's 1:02. Let's go ahead and get started. It looks like we have a person who's still trying to connect to the audio. So my name's Arnoldo Rodriguez. I serve as the city manager here at the city of Madera. I want to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon. Again, we do have a slightly smaller audience today in comparison to Tuesdays. With me from the city, we have James Troyer, who's here as well. And from HDL, we have David Mcpherson, we have David Ross, and I saw Matthew Eaton's on the call as well. The focus of today's meeting, there's probably going to be a little bit of overlapping for those of you that joined us on Tuesday, but really the focus of today's meeting is to go over the social equity component or application process and some of the nuances there. So this, and so if you have questions, you can feel free to ask them in the chat box. We'll try to get to them as we can. And then at the tail end of it, we'll open it up for Q&A. This is being recorded and we'll be putting it on our website. Tuesday's orientation should be posted on our website a little later on this afternoon. So some of this is going to sound like a slight repeat, and my apologies in advance, but I do want to go over it just in case anyone was unable to make Tuesdays or if this is the first time they're hearing about it. So I simply want to be respectful of that or respectful. So allow me to, I'm going to share my screen. I think I would have this down considering I do it so regularly, but so can everyone see my screen with the PowerPoint?
Yep.
Okay.
Good.
Okay, awesome. So again, so this is an orientation. It's not a mandatory orientation, but we did want to provide potential applicants an opportunity to hear us out, and if you have any questions, it gives you a direct line to the people that would be involved here at the city and as part of HDL. So again, my name is Arnoldo. I'm the city manager. We have David from HDL, Dave, Matthew, and then also James from the city. James Troyer, who's on right now, is the city's point of contact for this process, and his contact information is on the landing page. So we are offering 3 different permit types here at the City of Madera. We have standard applications or micro businesses. Those were discussed on Tuesday. We have social equity applications. Again, that's the focus of today's. And we also have vertical integrated cultivation, distribution, manufacturing, and testing applications, collectively referred to as vertical integration. Those were also the focus of Tuesday's presentation. We are, and this is a chart that's been presented to our city council, and you can find it on various documents here at the city. Overall, the city is, or the council has agreed to allow 6 standard retail applications, 2 social equity applications, and an unlimited number for vertical integration. So in terms of it being a competitive process, it's a competitive process for social equity and for standard retail, but it's a non-competitive process for vertically integrated. So at that point, the best way I can describe it is you would be competing against yourselves, because if hypothetically, if James were to apply and I were to apply, if James were to get one, that would have no standing in terms of if I were to get one. So as long as an applicant meets the minimum requirements and standards, then you would be able to receive a vertically integrated application. So there's an informational kickoff meeting. That's today. That's the orientation. Criminal background is going to be required of all 3 license types. Zoning verification letter is going to be required as well. And then we're also going to have a completeness review for all 3 types. This is the point system. This point system is articulated on the application, which David will be going through shortly here. One of the key things here is that there's no points given for the proposed location under social equity. The maximum number of points per application, again, the focus today is social equity. It's 2,700 points. The minimum number of points to advance to phase 3, which is the community meeting, would be 90% or 2,430 points. The community meeting is just that. It's a community meeting. There are no elected officials or decision makers at this meeting. Rather, the concept behind that is to allow an opportunity. It is noticed to surrounding property owners. It is to simply solicit community feedback on any proposed location. We obviously, Madera is not an enormous city, but at the same time, we just want to be sure that we're not missing anything. And we try to be very transparent in our approach to planning. And so we would want to invite community feedback. That community feedback, depending on what's said, staff would, in its presentation to the council, would prepare a summary of comments received. The minimum number of applications that will advance to phase 4 for social equity would be 10. There is going to be a city council interview for social equity that is subject to the Brown Act. It's a public meeting. It would take place in our city council meeting, and it would be it's going to be streamed. I think we're doing Facebook right now, and I think we're also doing Zoom as well. So again, that's a meeting that's going to be available. It's a public meeting, but at that point, that's when the interviews would take place. And the decision-making body for social equity is the city council, which is a little bit different than vertically integrated, because for vertical integration permits, that's going to be done at the city staff level. For standard retail application, that too is done by the city council. Both application types have exhibits A. Actually, all 3 of them have exhibit B. A nuance here is that social equity applications do have an additional exhibit, which is exhibit B as in boy. That is on our website. The processing fees, it's the same fee for all 3 application types, $10,551 with 50 cents. That is broken down. HDL is going to assist the city in reviewing the applications, roughly $5,900. There's a city fee of a little bit over close to $4,100. A zoning verification letter for $187. There's a background check of $300. That's not going to be paid to the city. Rather, that's That's a that's a direct pin into HDL, and there's a link on the applications that will take the applicants to that page. And then there's a live scan, commonly referred to as fingerprints, for $73. So again, the total fees are $10,551. However, subtracting the background check, applicants would remit a check to the city for $10,251 and some change. This is a map where we attempted to capture the areas that would exclude potential locations for cannabis. The blue highlights public facilities, including private and public schools. There is one nuance here that we figured, that we found out about while we were preparing it, or that commercial daycare centers are not mapped on here, and those are different than daycare homes. So daycare center is the definition applied by the state. There is not a local definition. Again, that's the state definition. However, one thing we notice is that some of them don't have business licenses, which is why they are not mapped. I know there's going to be questions about that. My recommendation would say use Google. That's obviously a great tool. You can look at the aerial maps, and you can you can usually tell if there's a daycare center. As part of the process, we're obviously going to we'll be verifying that as well, we being the city. But at the same time, I think that it would be advantageous for anyone that's looking at potential sites to review that as well. And so that's the quick version overview of my presentation. And with that, I know that I spoke really fast, and let me admit a couple of more people here. I'm going to be turning it over to Dave Mcpherson from the city. Dave, as a lot of industry members know, is a subject matter expert when it comes to cannabis. The city retained him at the onset of this process, and David has been with us since the beginning, and he's helped the city put it on the ballot and also flesh out a lot of the ordinances and resolutions, and he's really helped us tremendously. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to David, if that's okay.
Thank you, Arnaldo. And if you can bring up the social equity procedures, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Won't go into like the specific, I'll go into focus on some areas. Arnaldo get kind of high profile of everything. But I'm just going to bring attention to a few key areas, since they're not only unique, but also just for clarification on some things that came up, not only the last meeting, but also just for this process. So the first most important thing is, as you know, we've already opened up last Friday the process, but the social equity does have kind of two different dates of timelines that are critical. You'll see that phase 1A, which we'll go into a little discussion in a minute, has a closing date of May 2nd. So it will be important that you print in the right procedures, you follow compliance to the right deadlines that are necessary for this process, that you didn't accidentally print or look at some of the other ones and get them in your head, because it'll be important for that. So the first thing along with that is you'll see on the very top right, the email address. We need all correspondence to go to that email address, not to Arnaldo, although he may request for you, if you wish to be on the listserv, to send it directly to him, which is independently from inquiries regarding the application process. That's just since he's controlling all the listserv emails, so everyone's on that, which he'll talk about again when we close. But all emails related to the process need to go to the Cannabis at Madera website or email, so that not only that the individuals that are looking at it will get everything, but we can respond in a timely manner. Otherwise, they could get lost somewhere else. The second important thing here is that this is only going to allow, this process is going to be vetting out in a merit-based component for only social equity applicants to retail permits. The other process has 4 permits. This one has specifically 2 permits that are only for social equity applicants that qualify for the process. Moving down a little more down the process. So as noted again, we're already in the orientation. It's not mandatory. This will be recorded. So if we talk about something and you just say, I don't remember what they said about that, you can go back and take a look at it. On the website, on that link that is provided to you where you may have gotten this information, or if you were on the listserv, there was the link to it as well about all the different forms, the ordinances, procedures, any document that you need is listed here. So make sure that you get all those and review them, make sure you get to cover all of that. Moving down a little to the social equity applicant eligibility. The first part will be that amendments to the social application, there is, just like on the regular, what we call the standard process, once you submit everything, then it is going to be final in that process. But the first step is going to be the 1B that we will ask you for to submit everything. And the purposes of that process in the section 1A, and why there's a different time deadline on it, is we need to make sure that you qualify as a social equity applicant. So that information in 1B that you submit will tell us that you meet the criteria for that, and we will notify you that you are qualified to stay and apply for social equity application. If you do not qualify that, then you could use the information and continue and move over to the standard process, which we will inform you of, in which case then you need to go back and look at the standard process to follow those procedures, which will be similar in nature to this, but there are a few different deadlines in the timeline of that. And there's also one additional category, which is the location of the business that will then be required to be in that application. So should you not qualify again, then you would have the opportunity to do standard and then go back and make sure you're matching and mapping everything of the requirements for that and not follow this. So moving to the first part, which is kind of the general components of this. During the phase 1B, staff will then review the information that you submit, just like you would on the other process for a completion. We will be looking at the outline of stuff that Nardo mentioned. We will look to make sure it's complete. If you're missing something that can be cured, and that means if you forgot to sign something, you didn't get a notarization done, let's say you wrote 100 Main Street and you meant to put 102 Main Street, or that your zoning verification letter does not match what you put on the application. There's some inconsistencies there. Or if you turn in a scored component of the application, we use security as an example. Let's say there's 40 pages in your security criteria, and when you're scanning it, you have 40 pages, and all of a sudden we look through it and pages 38 through 42 are missing. We may ask you to provide us those pages, but in no way will we allow you to submit additional information or any other information that is being a scored criteria, and you need to adhere to that. So those are things that can be cured. If you submit everything, and we'll talk about which PDF files to put them in, if you submit it and you're missing a whole section, such as the security, which is a scored component, the evaluator will then score your total application. And if you have no security plan in there, your score will be 0 for the security plan. You won't be disqualified in nature, but you basically, let's say at 100 points, you just lost 20 points, then your score would already start there at a lower score based on the points attributed to that section. So if you have any curable items, we will review this and we will the city will send out a letter saying the following information is required for you to be cured within 5 days. It will be sent to the primary person that is listed on your application. So be mindful of any things, if you have any spams or things that may go out once the process closes, keep monitoring that. Then after 2 days, we are requiring here in this that you contact or just confirm you received the email so the city can check off the box, kind of reconcile that. If they don't hear from applicants, if time permits, they will try to circle back with the primary, either by phone, by calling the person to say, hey, we didn't get you confirmation that you received your cure letter. You're on the clock. You got 3 days left. You don't get additional days, but you've got 3 days left. And, you know, if I need to send it to another email, or you need to come by and get it or whatever, just so you know what your cure requirements are, you will still be required to meet that deadline of the 5 days in order to the city to get back the information. In that case, we have had an incidence where that has occurred. It'll be important. The other importance is if you're not on all those listserv or email lists, is that once we send those cure letters out, then he may send out to that listserv advising everyone that we just sent list cure letters out. Please really look on it. Not all applicants will probably receive one, but just look in there, that just know that the letters went out in that case. And then between that second day and whatever, if you would have got one, didn't get one, then you're good. But if you were in there, we would be circling back with you. So looking at limitations on the applications. So if you are an applicant for this social equity program, and to qualify it as an owner of interest on this application, if you have 10% or more on your application, then you cannot apply for this, for the social equity, and apply for the standard. You have to make a selection at least until a determination is made, and to go this route. And everyone must be listed on there that meet that qualification. And Arnaldo, we can bring up the application for social equity and talk about what they need to break down on for the ownership component of here. Still on the application. I mean, this is the procedures, I'm sorry. We need the application.
And just give me a second here, Dave,
Yep.
because my computer's.
While he's doing that, I'll continue with just the thought on this. So the other component of this is that the city is only going to be accepting 2 zoning verification letters, a maximum of 2 zoning verification letters per property. So if you're competing, if you're working with an owner that you got an LOI or a tentative lease agreement with, and that owner is, you know, doing multiples beyond 2, once the city receives 2 of either the standard or social equity or vertical for that property, the city won't receive accept more than 2 applications. 2 zoning verification letters for that property. And then also as a note of that, that if you get a social equity application and a standard one, and council approved both of them, then only one of them will be accepted onto that. And it will be based on the order of which the council approves those. Now, what we have done uniquely here to be mindful of the social equities giving more challenges is that later in the process, when we go through the steps of the process, is that you're going to be allowed to move locations, which we'll talk about in a moment. But for this purpose, Nerdle's he's got it up. I'd like for him to pull up just so we could talk about the ownership over here. So we go to the last page again on that. Right there. So the top of this, so the importance of this on that 10% is you need this component to end up being 100%. So if you have multiple owners, and let's say you had 10 or 12 owners associated with this, but there was only 4 out of the 12, only 4 of them create more than 10%. So you could put the 4 owners down here, that's 80%, but now you've got 6 that make up the 20%. As you can see on the second sample here, what it says here, at the bottom, you would say 6 additional owners that equal 20%. You don't need to list that one's at 2% or one's at 4% or one's at 8%. You just say 6 additional owners equals 20%. So when we look at this, it will roll up to 100% of what is here. But the most important part we're looking here is anyone that's over 10%, because that's really the big qualifier. That's also the individuals that are required to get the background check on the front side, which we'll go over in a moment. So that's why it's important to know that anyone over 10% needs to be independently identified here and required to have the background done. Okay, thank you, Leonardo. So we'll continue on to the next component of this, which is city's rights of reservations. Lots of things come up. Processes could get canceled, as we just had experience the last couple of years with COVID. Sometimes there needs to be suspended, delayed. Cities are a little far along. They're through their ordinance, they're through their tax measure, through multiple things. There's not expectation there, but until a permit is issued, the city reserves a right to cancel, amend, or modify this process as it may be necessary to do it based on situations that come about. So let's just be mindful of that. Moving on to the application submittal requirements. Again, the first part of it is that if you're going to submit this information via through FedEx, UPS, or some kind of common carrier services, be careful about the timing of that. As I say this today, every process we've done in the last 6 months, somebody has, unfortunately, after investing a lot of time, locking down property and so forth, has walked in 15 minutes late into the day and not get this submitted in a timely manner. And then we've got to tell them, sorry, we can't receive it. And I say that for two reasons. One is, try to go the day before, don't wait till the last day. We've heard cars break down, accidents on the freeway, all kinds of scenarios. The city can't do anything about it. The 4 o'clock time comes along and it's not in their hands already, you're out. There's nothing they can do. And again, as soon as I say this, then there's going to be someone. The address on here, you'll see the address on here, where to send it to if you are going to have it, having to be routed to the city, make sure it's on there. And then the other thing we've experienced recently is both FedEx, UPS, or the common carriers, even though you try to overnight something in this environment that we've been with COVID and lack of resources at some of these places, next day doesn't mean the same thing to them if it got there 2 days or 3 days late due to something that the limitations that they do. Because if they stop their routes and just move it to the next day, it doesn't really help you on this sort of situation. So just be mindful of that as well. And that's just a reality of what we're facing in our current environment. Looking at the submittal deadlines here, again, because this is social equity and only social equity, that's why you can't mix up the dates. Your first component of this, which is the application criteria that we went over the top page of that. Phase 1A is due Monday, May 2nd. The goal would be is for us to review that and notify you that you do qualify. And then once we tell you that, you can proceed. It doesn't mean that you need to stop working on the other criteria, because the other criteria are the same as the standard. So if you're still intended to move forward, if you don't qualify for this, you at least continue working on it. You're not running out of time at the end by waiting for a response to this. But they will be done very timely and back to you on that. If you meet that criteria, then you have phase 1B, is you will turn everything in by this deadline. And I believe this deadline is consistent with the other ones of when they're due. So we're trying to make sure that we get back to you to be responsive on the 1A part as fast as we can. You can see here in the 1B component of here, these are all the items. We encourage you to make sure you print all of these as soon as you can, if you haven't already. That way you're looking at them, you're reading them to make sure some of these things need to be notarized. You may have to have all your owners acknowledge some of this information. You may have to follow up with companies or people that you're relying on to get information. So you want to make sure that you've read through this, see if you have to take some action now to start getting the information that you need associated with all this stuff. And then, you know, checking it and make sure that all of it's there, that you don't accidentally forget one of these forms, then we would have to cure it later if it's not there. So make sure that that's there.
So David, can we move on from here? We did receive a question regarding phase 1A. It says the social equity business application pages 1 through 3 are due May 2nd. The last subsection on page 1 lists all application materials required. Are all of those items due May 2nd, or only some of them due, or none? In other words, what exactly is due May 2nd? Thank you.
Yeah, so May 2nd is just that one application that we pulled up, that Arnaldo pulled up. This form is the only thing you will see that it's uniquely social equity. Yeah, so this form is uniquely different on the questions that we have. Arnaldo, can you go back up to the top? I think I want to make sure I just want to make sure that
it says
the
social
form.
equity. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm just looking at yeah. So
Okay.
this is 1A is only this information that is required. So this is 1A. So what we're doing is we're looking at reviewing this, make sure there's documentation on Appendix B. Maybe we started to talk about Appendix B at this point. So Appendix B, when you read through what is the criteria for this, you need to submit and make sure anything that's referencing in Appendix B, you need to make sure that the proper documentation to qualify under Appendix B is attached to this application form. Right? So
David, I just pulled up Appendix B. If
yeah.
you wanted to talk about it now, or
yes, no, let's do it here since we were on that and 1A and the questions associated. So again, that 3-page form that's to be completed in its entirety, and the documentation needs to be attached to it for Appendix B in order to qualify, which is in the questions asked in there. The questions are asked in the application, and then the documentation associated with that. So as you can see, the applicant has to be a resident of Madera from a period of time, is currently a resident of Madera, and has been for the last 5 years. The household income component of this, which depending on your individual circumstances here, that meets the household size. And then I go back to the B, arrested or convicted in the county of Madera, because the social equity is focused on those that are local component of that. And so it's not the city, it's the county. So if you were arrested after November, which is the Compassionate Use Act, the 215 rules, so that if it's anything affiliated with that, you meet that criteria, you provide that information. And then the B, which is farther down the road, once you kind of followed all that element of it, the equity applicant verification process. So you can see on here, we're talking about that. An applicant's eligibility shall be determined at phase 1A of the social equity application process. If the applicant fails to qualify, we'll notify you so that you can move on to the standard, which I kind of mentioned. And then you have to, each owner of the social equity will require to complete the criminal background check on the portal to pay the appropriate fees. This last meeting that we had on Tuesday, a question would come up about if you had your record expunged, or if, to meet this, do I still need to report all that? The answer is yes. It's not going to be a disqualifier in it, because obviously it's the social equity. But keep in mind that the disqualifiers for here for Madera is going to be the same disqualifiers that would be at the state. So their consistency to address the social equity for people that have been impacted by the war on drugs, regardless of if you've had your record expunged or not, we need that information disclosed, even if you were arrested but not convicted, because if it shows up, it doesn't mean you're going to be disqualified for anything. It just makes to make sure that you're truthful and you've identified everything that you have been arrested or convicted on, so that that evaluation can be done, or any documentation that you're doing about any convictions, which is listed as you go through it. It really just goes into, that criteria of just validating of what proof of information you got to meet the criteria of your financial situation or the residency information or proof of convictions. And we try to be flexible enough on here to address all those activities. You can see from the C, the definition of owner, it has to be 51% or more. It doesn't have to be one individual that makes that qualification. You can have one person be 40% and another be 20%. And you've got the social equity owners that meet 60%. But at no time shall the social equity owners and an aggregate drop less than 51%. So that's the emphasis on here, that it must be 51% or more of one or more applicants that meet that, and they all must be at least 10% of that minimum. There's that minimum threshold 10%, but the aggregate needs to be 51% or more to meet that threshold requirement on there. You're also going to be asked to fill out the business owner acknowledgement form. When you read through that, it'll say that you're agreeing to that. You're not doing any sidebar, straw agreements, or any kind of holding company or anything that is going to try to circumvent the intent, which our knowledge is brought up. So when you read through that, if you misrepresent or try to falsify or do something to try to circumvent this, and you are identified at not only social equity, errors or omissions or misrepresentation, you will be disqualified and no longer eligible for the permit if it's issued to you. So make sure you read through that, make sure it matches to what we're asking for on the attachment B, and that it's consistent with the requirements. If there's something on here as you get through this that's unique, that doesn't meet, you don't fill into the boxes in here. That's what the Q&A is for. We'll try to respond and be responsive for those to try to identify the circumstance or situation that if this information does not cover it all, then we can try to give you some guidance on that in the Q&A and share it with everyone, which is the goal, is to put it on the Q&A when we have questions that others could benefit or have value from the response of that. So thank you for that, Arnaldo. So let's go back to, hopefully they answered that question. And if not, we can talk about at the end when we answer more questions, make some notes, and we can cover that. So phase 1B, we talked about just the requirements of the list of apps and forms and information. Now we're going to talk about the flash drive, go down a little more. So the flash drive contents. So this is broken down into different categories in the PDF files as you see here. So all those forms that you saw, make sure that they go in the appropriate bucket. And the reason for this, and it's important, is that when these are downloaded or submitted to, or the flash drive, when the flash drive is downloaded, it is downloaded by various different people. You may have one individual from our team that is looking for completeness and will be looking for one thing. We have an evaluator that's looking at only file 2. For example, if your security plan is you accidentally put it in file 5 and it's not in file 2, that they may score your application and ding you for 0, give you a 0 score on your security plan because it's not in file 2, and they're not going to know what's on the other ones. And so trying to make sure that everything is there is going to be important, that you follow the instructions on there. And then each category it goes into different things to be looked at from specific people's in there. The other thing, and regarding the file number 2, is, as we noted in here, is that you are limited to 200 pages. So if you go and exceed that page count, then you could be dinged points for exceeding that count. And you'll notice that some of the things, that's only the score criteria. So like your financial information, there's certain things that are not limited or affected on there. And we've listed them on here. It says response to the evaluation criteria and A through G found in appendix. And we'll go over that, shall be limited to that. The background, proof of capitalization, everything, all those forms that you do in file number 1, that is not included in your 200 pages. We're only looking at those items that are in the Appendix A that will be impacted by the 200-page response element to this. So moving down to the criminal background. So you will notice on here, there's a link to this. It's also on the website. So this is where you would go in as each individual. Just to clarify, you will go on the portal, the HCL portal, and it'll ask the questionnaire related to your background and all the requirements in order to meet the city requirements and the state requirements, and make sure that when we check all this, that it's going to be on there. And again, if convictions or arrests, which it says on there, is that you need to make sure you include all that information on there. It will be for each individual. So the $300 fee that you see noted here, it's per person that has that 10% or higher threshold that you are listing on the application. And so that will need to be done. You would take that receipt that will be provided in, and then it's included in one of the PDF files that is noted on here as part of that. So the next component here is the zoning verification letter. So the city is creating, they've got something that they're going to be able to a form with all the information to them. So we ran into a little just kind of clarification on this as a comment I made the other day. There's not a form necessarily right now that that you're going to fill out. You can request it, email or in a letter format, say I'm at the following address, you meet the criteria here. You know, if there's a suite number or an address number, be specific to meet this criteria. You will submit a check to the city for the dollar amount, which is $167.50, which is all the fees are under the fee section in here. Submit that to the city. A question came up earlier today was, well, could I pay in advance and then email you the request for that? As long as the city receives the money prior to you providing the information for the location, that's fine, but the city is not going to start reviewing for the zoning verification letters without having payment for that. In past, we've seen it where people ask for multiples and the address doesn't work, then they haven't paid for it, and the city has wasted their resources trying to research it for you.
Yeah, the fee is $187.50.
I'm sorry, the
Fee is
$187.50.
$187.50. You said $167.50.
Oh, I think we have a
Thank
typo here then. Yeah.
Then we do, yes.
Yeah.
So I was going off that. So thanks,
Yeah.
James.
Okay.
So we will amend that. In there. So thanks for bringing that up, James. Don't know why it didn't connect on form. So yeah, so we'll correct that. So please make a note of that for everyone that's on this call. And so then the next part of this would be.
And David,
Oh,
prior to moving on, so
yes.
I have a question. Is the zoning verification letter required as part of phase 1A?
No, so for social equity, it is not part of 1A because we're just focusing on the qualifications of the owners for 1A.
Okay, thanks.
So, but that's a good question because I don't believe the form does ask for the location specific yet on there. If it is, you could put pending on there and then update it as we move along. But let me make a note of that so we can, when a ZBL. The ZBL is not required at the time, but we do need to note if we need to modify the form to not request it there or put pending on there. So we'll try to respond that it does ask for the location at that point. So with that said, the modification of the fee, the other fees are there. Just take another note that we mentioned the live scan thing. So whoever the two permits are awarded to, as you move through the process at that time, it's when the city would reach out to you and say, you have 3 owners, just use an example, you have 3 owners associated with your permit. We are now requiring you to get your live scan done. Please contact us to make arrangements to have the live scan completed if when the city does that. So that would be an after fee. So the zoning verification letter would be done with your application when you pay for that, and then you would attach the zoning verification letter in your package which is in the instructions. You'll have your receipt for each owner in one of those PDF files as listed, and then the actual fee. Although Ronaldo listed the fee as a total, I think it was $10,555. The actual application is $9,991. It's just when you add up all the subcategories, that's just the total cost for the process at this time. So as we move through now, let's into the fee. This is kind of more of just the details out. So you can see 1A is just registration and eligibility, just on trying to identify that you have. We've already talked about Appendix B. Once you are actually determined that you can go there, then you move on and you just fill out the process, which is on the appendix. On your appendix, the only thing that you'll notice that you are not required to conduct the requirements for the location, because we're not going to score that, because that if you need to move to a different address, once all the permits or the applications are reviewed and the council makes a decision on who the 6 standard retailers are, that would free up all those properties that would give you an opportunity to move over. But if you're awarded one of these 2 permits, once they are cleared and before you're interviewed by the council, you would have an opportunity to move over to a different location as part of this. So as we go down, we'll talk about that. So 1A, we went over in detail. 1B is consistently the same as the standard. You just do not have to do the location element in there. Phase 2 is similar in nature, that the city, here's all the scoring elements. As I mentioned, the location is not on this. The city will be picking a minimum of 10 applicants who meet this threshold. If there are even 10 that meet this threshold, but if the city happen to get 25 applicants that meet the 90%, based on the quality and the quantity of applications, this figure may change to be a higher number than 10 that would be interviewed by the city council for consideration. So not knowing where that's at, that gives us a little flexibility in there. So to include more people, especially in a very competitive process, that everyone has a chance to be considered at or increase their chance of being increased in there, but you still need to meet the minimum of 90%. Scoring criteria, we're going to go a little more into detail on that. Phase 3 is a public meeting. Arnaldo already talked a little bit about it. That's just really to get input from the public, address any concerns, anything that he needs to be mindful of before they move these forward to city council, and before city council makes a decision and they get beat up at a council meeting for not being aware of circumstances or situations surrounding that before they make their decision. They are more educated regarding any concerns associated with that. So that process is insane. The only key thing here, as I mentioned, is that when you, Ronaldo, you can go back up to the paragraph in phase 3, just I'll read it out. And right there, in addition, since the location will not be scored, criteria for the social process, applicants will be eligible to participate in phase 3 shall be given the opportunity to request a new location for their business applications from any property which has qualified under the standard social equity or vertically integrated process. So if any of those are out, the property owner is releasing them over their LOI and it's available to you, and you see an interest in that, you can then move over and be considered for a property. It's already been vetted. We know it is. And so then it's something to give you a better location. And that'll need to be done prior to you participating in phase 3, because if the public is going to give any input or concerns regarding a property, they need to know that before you change it over, because then they haven't had a chance to address that with you as your consideration for there. So that's the one thing that is unique about that. Okay, let's move to Appendix B. I'm sorry, Appendix A at the end of this, which is just more the detail of the criteria that we're losing here, the first thing we want to point out to you is this PRA thing that's on here, that your application is a public document. If we have a request for it, then we noted here, we'll notify you that applications are being requested to be released. If you wish to have anything on there right off the bat that you consider proprietary or confidential, we encourage you to put it on any pages associated with that so that it'll be a red flag to at least look at that for the city before they redact or print anything for that. But if you wish to not have anything on there, and even though you put proprietary or confidential on it, that it has to still meet the threshold that the PRA requires, that will be reviewed by legal before it's being released. If they don't agree with you, then you would have to take the actions indicated here to at your own cost and liability and expense in order to take any proactive order to of injunctive relief or remedy to not have the information released. But if you're saying that you don't do that, they'll do the best they can to try to at least redact some of the information. So looking at the various sections that are going to be scored upon, a lot of times comes in the question, so I'm not going to go into details. Some of the criteria are pretty clear on here. The only thing that I would point out that if for some reason you are looking at a micro business for a social equity application, that we are only going to be scoring the retail component of it. So we don't want to ding you for cultivation or distribution and bring your score down because it's not matching apples with apples. However, it doesn't mean that you don't have to meet the threshold requirements of the minimum standards of the 80% on the other categories. So you will be notified of that will need to be addressed, but it will be scored specifically on the retail elements of this. So we will only talk about the retail component of this. So here are the various criteria on here. They're very consistent with some of the state laws, some of the policy direction the council has requested, and the information that they wanted to see on here. So the bigger area will be, again, the other categories we talked about are part of the standard, which we went over on the standard and the vertically integrated, on the vertically integrated and others, which is the manufacturing testing. So we're not going to repeat all that associated in there, since the focus is on the retail. Today, you can watch the video or go through this and ask questions related to the other categories related to this. So moving to looking at section B. Which is the labor equity, diversity, and inclusion plans. The one area I want to point out here is item 8, that if you are trying to brand yourself as a social equity and a local owner, which obviously your 1A would have to reflect that you're a County of Madera ownership for the social equity. So you kind of almost have to force to some degree there to meet that criteria. Here, you still need to meet the 1A criteria in its requirements to meet there, but that if you're branding yourself on there, on this case, that you have to comply with the attachment B component of this, not the 8 here, which is this is standard for all the but that is a minimum, obviously, but you need to meet the higher threshold under attachment B for that criteria. The safety plan, security plan is outlined there. Should you have questions associated with that, feel free to ask the questions, research some of the categories. We reference a section in there of the state requirements there in the 1506 under the 2A in the requirements. The drug must meet the requirements of the Department of Cannabis Control. So look that over and make sure it complies with that along with the other requirements affiliated with that. Going down to section E, the qualifications component of this, you see that there's various ways to get to the different elements of here. Obviously, the council wants to have the best of breed, make sure that you're capable of running this type of business. you understand what you're getting into, or you have the experience associated with that. It comes in a variety of ways in which how you can get that experience. Doesn't have to be all related to cannabis, but some of it is distributed in the knowledge component of that. Criteria for that. So again, in the definitions that we've already talked about, it's not only in the city ordinance, but in the state. The city ordinance has the 10% threshold, where the state has the 20%. So you do have to adhere to both that and to the city one, or the higher threshold, which is the city one, which is consistent with the state one. It's just the 10% element. So in section F, the one I want to point out, affiliated with this is, again, concerns regarding just the youth element of this. So you can see where 3C talks about lists all known nearby well-traveled paths to schools and describe how cannabis business will proactively protect the youth on these paths from exposure to cannabis. So that's a policy decision, really concern of the council, and making sure that it addresses some of those things. So before you get to your local, if you're successful to get to the public meeting, a lot of times that comes up, so that you want to make sure how that's addressed, not only in your application, but to alleviate any concerns at that type of level of the meeting, since your application will be accessible to individuals that are reviewing this, making that final decision. Section G, just be aware that the city does have a tax already in place. So in some places, if you've gone through a similar process in some of the other client cities, that they may have not had a tax in place. So you will be subject to the tax. And so having to come up to try to put in a dollar amount for in lieu of the tax is not as essential as some of these other categories. It doesn't mean that you're competing with other people that are providing benefits for other organizations and other needs of the city, non-tax related. So how you draft your strategy for this, you may want to know what the tax rates are for the different various categories for this. So just be mindful of that it is a little different. So you don't have to throw out a figure higher affiliated with the offset, a tax, or a similar component of this, that the focus could be a balance of all the requirements here to meet those needs. And then section H, as we mentioned, this is the category that you are not subject to as long as you're under the social equity program. Should you not be qualified for that and move over to the standard or vertical, then you would be required to also include this in your proposal, which is listed under the category under the standard if you get moved over there. So again, just want to emphasize, look at the scored elements. This is not, section H is not a scored element for the social equity applicants. And with that, we have concluded at least the review of this, but the important thing we wanted to make sure is that we allotted time for questions. So at this time, if we have any questions, Renato, why don't we take them as they come in?
Okay, so we do have a couple of questions, and then maybe we can jump over to talk about the tax. I know in the past I've received inquiries regarding what the adopted tax rate is. So a couple of questions, I'm going to try to capture them, but if those are you that are on it, if you feel that I butcher them, please let me know. While most documents are scanned for submission, are wet signatures required, or are e-signatures, aka DocuSign, sufficient with acknowledgement that the zoning verification letter would indeed need to be wet signature from the city? So are e-signatures appropriate, David?
So I think the original forms, I think we have on here. I want to make sure that when we've said that I'm consistent with what we had put on here.
And we may have to follow up, because I recall us talking about it, David, but that was a while back when we were drafting it. I can't, unless you remember. off the top of your head? I know I don't.
Yeah, so on page 4, the top of page 4, it says the application package must include all the following documents with original signatures for each document. So on the top of 4, the 1 through 8 has to have original signatures. And we say originals, I guess the question at the time, because the person asking this question was asking about DocuSign. Of course, in the COVID environment, when we were working on this, does the city accept that for things? And that could be a question. I don't know how critical it is to have that. If you could put that in an email to the cannabis site, we will respond to that, but also have it as a record to notify everyone of how we would handle that.
Okay.
We need clarification from legal counsel regarding if that would be acceptable.
Okay, we'll do that. Another question. We are looking at doing a delivery service only. How would this be classified?
So because it is still retail, and retail is either storefront or non-storefront, you are still competing. If you're only, since today we're talking about social equity, if you're applying for that, you would say non-retail or non-storefront, and you would be competing for one of those 2 permits. If it's deemed that for your model would work and the council makes a decision to accept it. So you would be competing for those 2 social equity permits. If you were competing for the standard, same way, if you were competing standard, you would be competing for the 4 standard ones as part of that as well. So you are considered retail for the purpose of this process.
Okay, I received another inquiry, but it's specific to vertical integration, but others may have it. We are looking at doing a vertical site. Must all the activities occur on the same parcel or property?
So the answer to that is no. If you watch the video in detail, I mean, I'll go and explain it, but also encourage you, there's other questions associated vertically, so you should go watch the video when it gets posted. But if you are applying for a vertically integrated, you must have the cultivation, manufacturing, and distribution on one site. You could do the retail at a different site, but because we don't have a cutoff date, you must, when you submit, whatever time that is, when you submit your application, you must include the retail in there if the city has a cutoff date. For example, right now we don't have a cutoff date, but if the city puts up notice, hey, be mindful that in 60 days we're shutting this process down, and you try to get in your vertical application and it does not include retail, then you will not be able to assign a retail location that's not on the same site as your vertically integrated, because the process is closed. They will not accept any more information. So your answer is yes, you can have it as a second location, but you also need to be mindful that when the process closes, you cannot submit it afterwards while you're still trying to explore a retail location that you have not recognized and put on your application when it's submitted during that cutoff time. And watch the video of that, which we discussed on Tuesday, for any other additional questions.
I'm trying to go down the list. We had early on at the onset at 1 o'clock, at 1:02, we received one. Will we be able to apply for a regular license and social equity license? And you covered that, David, unless you have anything else to add.
No, I think we did it. You can,
Yeah.
one or the other. If you're 10% or more, or any person or combination who's on your application cannot be on both.
I think we've covered all the other questions, I believe, unless there's someone online that would like to ask a question right now. Either you can do it in the box or you can unmute yourself and you can just ask for echo. Well, so before we hop off, let me share a screen. And this is a question that's come up in the past. So we do have adopted rates for taxes right now. So council back in January approved the rates on the right here. Even though it says recommended, this is the presentation that was provided to the city council. So for cultivation with artificial lighting, it's $6 per square foot. For a combination of lighting, it's $4. For more artificial, it's $2, and nurseries $1. For testing, it's 1% of gross receipts. For retail sales, it's 4% of gross receipts. For distribution, 2%, and then for manufacturing, it's 2%. So this is also going to be posted on our website. And again, council approved this January the 19th, so a couple of months ago. If you are interested in watching that discussion, all of our city council meetings are online, again, January the 19th, and you could go back and watch that discussion. I think it was very thorough, but it was a relatively brief discussion. Any other questions from anyone, or is there anything that anyone would like to highlight? Or David, would you or anyone from your team like to add anything? Or James?
The only thing I would say, I pulled up the application, the 3-page. So we do ask for the applicant's name, physical address, and how long you live that address. I don't see on here where we're asking any individual for their for the physical address of the property yet, because of the zoning verification letter checklist. So it doesn't appear that you would need that information listed on here. When you submit the 3-page one, other than the documentation that you meet the qualifications for the social equity.
Any other questions from anyone on the call, or anything from either the HDL team or the city team that you would like to have or clarify?
Yeah, so just to clarify, the zoning verification letter is $187.50. It has to be paid for in advance before we generate the letter. So you can come into City Hall and pay by check, or we take debit and credit card over the phone. And the contact person is Brandy Garcia, is bgarcia@madera.gov.
Yeah, and I'll put her email. Let me put her email on the chat box so so everyone has it. And if for any reason, if you forget the email address, you can always email James, whose contact information is on the landing page, and he can get it over to Brandy. Because I know we've thrown 3 contacts at you today. For any reason, if you're like, I can't remember, just email James, and James will be sure that he'll get it over to the right person. So just remember James in all of this. And again, going back to something that David mentioned earlier, we do have a listserv. If you received notification of this email or of this meeting from the city, you're on the listserv. If you have not received any emails from the city regarding this meeting, you are not on the listserv. So if you'd like to add yourself, it's not necessary, but you're more than welcome. Just send James an email and we'll add you on there. And again, the goal is that we keep everyone apprised of the process, and any changes or anything like that, simply moving forward. We want to be sure that we stay connected to prospective applicants.
Arnold, if I just remind you of that, only if you need to be a listserv, we're going to use the other email, but we need everyone to go to the Cannabis at Madera for any inquiries or requests.
Thank you. Yeah, so just go to the city's to the Cannabis landing page, and everything's on there. And James' contact, his phone number's on there, his email's on there as well. So seeing no other questions, I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Also want to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon. Hopefully you found it informative. Again, if anything comes up, don't hesitate to reach out to James, and he'll be sure to get it to the right person. And I wish everyone well. And so good luck if you elect to apply. Any last words of wisdom, David, or are we okay to sign off?
Yep, I think we're good.
We're good.
Just give us any questions if anything comes up.
Okay, sounds good, everyone. Thank you very much and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.